Well, hello, friends, neighbors. John, your Whisky neighbor here. Welcome to another Tuesday night, and welcome to another special. As I have a guest with me from Broken Oak, it's Shawn from Grand Prairie.
Hello.
Hello, Shawn. We've never met aside from a few minutes ago when you agreed to come on here and talk about your distillery. And you were so kind, your group, to send me a bottle of this Broken Oak rye. And I'm hoping pretty soon tonight I'll be able to get into that. But to start, can you just, say hi to the group and say a little bit about, yourself and your distilling company out of Grand Prairie?
Sure. I do have to say that I'm looking forward to see your take on our whiskey. This is our first release. We're a very young distillery still, so this is the batch number one that we've put out. So, we're still in the growing stages. The whiskey's young. It's 3 years old. We've been around for 5, but we weren't able to quite afford to be able to put away whiskey kind of right away. Takes a lot of money to get started. So I kind of got my start. It was by accident. It was a winemaking hobby, if you'd believe that. I started making wine in my garage in 2016. The oil patch kind of slowed down, so I was looking for something to do. I just woke up one day and I was like, I'm going to start making wine. So that's what I did. That's kind of what got me into the fermenting and figuring out how to, play around, do that kind of thing. I like doing that. I found that I didn't even really like wine when I started doing it. I just kind of did it as something I wanted to try. And I found that I really like port. So I don't know if you're familiar with wines, but to make port, you need to infuse wine with brandy. And so I found myself buying brandy to fortify my wine with. And I thought, well, how do I make brandy? I want to do brandy too, so I can can control all the flavors. So it kind of took me down a whole another road. I was like, oh, so you make wine and then you distill it. Well, how do I distill? So I just started, Googling that. Google's a gem for me. That's kind of where I learned a lot of it. Took a little bit of school. And after, once I decided to go commercial and open up, I thought I should, take some formal some kind of formal education. So, so I started making brandy in the garage to add to my wine. And I was like, oh, I really like this because it was a quicker return. Wine, you have to sometimes wait a long time to be able to enjoy it, let everything settle out, where this was, you ferment it and you distill it. And, first I started making vodka and, flavored it and whatnot, and played with some rye in the garage, which was a nightmare. I actually started getting worried because rye, I don't know if you know much about dealing with that, but it's very viscous. And like the still that I was using in the garage, there was a heating element in it. So the first 3 that I did, the mash was really thick, and I tried distilling it off, and my still would just fill with smoke, and I was like, oh man, I can't do this. Like, what am I doing? Like, I've already had plans to open up a distillery, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I can't do it. Luckily, it got easier with the proper equipment. But
sure, you covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time. You had an interest. You started in wine, and then you were fortifying wine. And I have to say, I'm not a wine fellow. I am tried and true whiskey. However, a lot of whiskeys aged or finished in port and different sherry. Now much more, red wines and whatnot. So I've had to go buy some ports, go buy some sherries, and try to get my palate a little more acclimatized to that. Yeah. But I love that your journey then took into brandies and all of that, and then you've already taken us into rye, like distilling rye, which I absolutely have heard can be a gummy nightmare. I've totally heard that. Yeah.
And it's the Canadian whiskey, right? So I kind of knew that that's what was going to be probably our first release. We wanted to keep it super local, and rye was one of those things. So we kind of knew that we were going to be doing something with that. When we got into it, we knew that, rye whiskey would be probably our first release, and it was.
Oh, that's excellent. So, you mentioned local, you mentioned, rye, like what's here in this good bottle, which I'm hoping to open soon, is known, like in Canada, we're known for that. But when you say local, are you partnered with a local farm or anybody kind of around you that's growing the rye for you?
No, and that's the hard part, is that although the Canadian whiskey is rye. Rye is actually extremely hard to find. There's not a lot of people that grow it in Alberta. So when we did ours, when I was playing in the garage, I found it on BSG and kind of ordered it in. And then when we went commercial, I thought, oh yeah, I thought exactly that. I'm going to partner with a local farmer and I'm going to get some rye. Coming from the oil patch, I didn't really have, I didn't have that knowledge of, a lot of the farming and stuff, and didn't realize that not a lot of people grow rye. So I got it from a seed cleaning facility down in southern Alberta is where I ended up having to find it. But yeah, I didn't realize that it would be so hard to find.
Very interesting. Yeah, I know some barleys are coming out of, is it Red Shed here in Alberta? They do a lot of malting and whatnot for people. And I have heard of different distilleries getting local rye, getting together with a farmer and gives that commitment, to how much they're going to grow and that kind of thing. And when I was out at Sons of Van, we were getting sacks of BC grown rye as well when I was out there for that week, which was fantastic. But I didn't know, honestly, that it was that hard to get rye that you could use, to mash and then distill. So, hi, Peter and Ron and Seaway and Tater. Thanks for joining us. I see a few people online. And one thing I'll just say to the crowd online, you guys jump in with questions at any time. I think both Shawn and I will gladly interrupt the flow and try to answer some questions as we can.
Absolutely.
Shawn, why don't we talk about this bottle? Why don't I open it up and pour a dram, and maybe you could talk a bit about, only what you're willing to share. You and I didn't get a chance to check that. I might ask questions, and if it's not something you want to talk about, just move it on. But I'd love to know, are we talking a portion of rye, a portion of corn, a portion of barley? Are we talking all rye? Those kinds of things. I'm very interested in this.
Okay. So for us with this, like I said, it's our experiment. It's our first batch, first barrels. We're still figuring things out. We, haven't really done a lot of, obviously haven't made a lot of whiskey in a commercial facility, and like aging in the barrels. It's all different going from small cask to big cask. Like everything changes. So really for us, we're still playing. We're still figuring it out. So this bottle, I didn't know how much rye we actually wanted in it. We wanted to have something that's fairly easy to drink, not super spicy. So what we did was we did two different mash bills. We did one mash bill was 100% rye. And then we did another mash bill that was wheat, oats, and barley. And that was our base whiskey, as we call it. We aged it separately. And then once they were done, after 3 years, we just kind of played with it. We just, we would sit there and, have some drinks and play around with the different proportions until we found the mix that we found was right where we wanted it. So what else can I tell you about it? So it's young. It's just over 3 years old. Being a new distillery, obviously cash flow is a thing. So, we want to get, although I'd love to be able to, hold on to it for 5 years, 8 years, 10 years. To start, we need to have some cash flow. So we kind of pulled it out right after 3 years. So it is a young whiskey. What else can I tell you?
That's okay. And I heard two different mash bills, and then it is young. I get that. But what I missed, and I'm sorry, I was opening a bottle, and you might have heard the cork pop. I apologize. But do you mind saying it again? Sorry. What kind of are you? New oak, or is it ex-bourbon, or is it like your own barrels that you were aging your brandy in, or anything? Like what's going into the casking behind this?
So this one was once used bourbon casks. For this, we've recently started working with Cooperage in Alberta here now. So he brings up wine barrels. He opens them up, bores them out, takes all the char out, and then recharges them. So refurbishes them essentially. So you have pretty much a brand new barrel. So we've switched to using those now because the barrels that we were getting when we first started, there wasn't like a barrel store that you could go to get whiskey barrels to age in, because it's still a young industry. So we were kind of limited to what was accessible, and the barrels that we were finding that we were getting were just not. They just weren't good enough for us. We had problems sometimes like sealing them and just issues with them that way. So now we're getting refurbished barrels. So I'm curious to see how like that's going to actually change our whiskey coming out in the future years.
Right. So, yeah, and I know that's getting more popular, that, scraped and recharred barrels kind of really do reinvigorate them quite a bit. Yeah. This, though, is, like you said, it's young, but it's whiskey, so it's at least 3 years, 3 years and a day. But it's this has been in first fill ex-bourbon, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Now, are you going to join me? Do you have a little?
I do have some here, of course.
Okay. So, what should I? Now, the thing is, if I say that and you give me a flavor note, I'm sure I'll smell it because I am suggestible. But
I'm curious to see what you're going to say. Everybody's going to get something a little bit different from it. That's just how it works.
Oh yeah, for sure. Now, I'm actually I'm getting quite a sweeter or open, almost floral note. It's really kind of fruity, floral right off the top. Is there any malted rye in here?
No. Oh, no malted rye. No, it was.
Okay, and the reason why I'm saying that is, and it might sound a bit critical. I don't mean that, but it smells a little bit. Sometimes I get almost like a cinnamon bubblegum kind of note sometimes in some ryes, and I'm getting a little bit of that. And I will say I get that a lot in malted rye, so that's why I'm like, oh, what's going on? Oh, and Peter, yeah, the ABV in here is 43.
43.
And how did you guys decide on the 43? The last fellow I was talking about, a Black Fox, is the first distiller I've ever heard where he said, we proofed it to where we want, because everyone does that about 1% at a time. You get it to the taste. And then he said, and then we went higher than where we thought it was perfect, because most people put a little bit of water. And I thought, no way. I thought people like yourself tended to release it. Oh, this is perfect. 43 and a half, 44, 45.2. It was just perfect. But for that was John from Black Fox, and he said, no, we go a little higher because most people put water in it. How did you come at 43?
For us, it was we sat and tried the different ABVs, and we did that. We came to a spot where we were happy with it, and left it. I mean, the 43 is not that high, but if somebody wants to throw a couple cubes into it or whatever, they still can.
Okay,
but, so we just trial and error.
Yeah. Now Ron asks, while I'm still nosing this, do you use a climate-controlled warehouse, or like some? And it's not common, but again, the last fellow I talked to, they have their barrels outside. And are you in a climate-controlled, or are you out in the elements?
It's in our warehouse, in our distillery. So it's just as the warehouse heats up and cools down, that's where they're aged. Yeah. And I find like we are, like, being in Alberta, it's very dry. So I feel like that makes a big difference in the aging process. And I'm not an expert yet. Like I said, I've only got a handful of barrels put away, but I find that just being in our climate and being really dry, we get a lot more of the wood flavors in the whiskey.
Okay, well, we'll see how that comes out in the palate. For me, the nose is still, I made reference to like a cinnamon chewing gum, but for me, that means there's some high sugars in here. For me, there's a good vanilla, there's a good floral note, but there is that little spicy cinnamon red heart candy kind of going on. That's a bit sweet on the nose for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I do get that too. I get like a warm apple crumble, kind of like butterscotch.
I'm so with butterscotch. That's where I was going with that sweet, almost candy note. I definitely get butterscotch. The crumble might come maybe with the palate as I warm it up. To me, sometimes that's a graininess. But Peter White asks, will there be a cask strength version coming on? And that's often hard to get to. You've expressed how it's tough. Not having another product line like a beer release that you're making your money on while this is aging. I mean, this is how you're making ends meet. Have you thought about a cask strength release?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're still in the experiment. We're still trying all sorts of different things. We want to put some bourbons away and whatnot. Our next release, actually, like outside of this is going to continue to come out, but is a single peated malt that we're doing right now. So like that's at 3 years, but it's not quite ready yet. I think it's gonna have to ride for probably 5-6 years before that comes out. And that one is a special release. That one will probably be cast strength.
Oh no, that is very interesting. This to me, the nose, perhaps a little bit young. Oh, we're going in. Okay, we better cheers.
Ooh.
Cheers, Shawn.
Cheers.
Mm. Okay, sorry. What was the you talked about? I need to chew on that a little bit. It actually feels nice in the palate. It's got a bit of body in it, but it tends into that sweet. I like what you said with butterscotch. For me, I'm going to say that candy red cinnamon hearts because I do get a little bit of cinnamon on here. But for rye, it's not. Oh, okay, now it is on the longer finish. I was waiting for, that rye hug, that spice kick, yeah. Right? I mean, if I'm pouring a rye, I like to get kicked around a bit. And it is there. I'm going to try another sip to see if I can kind of warm up my palate. I have to say it's the first whiskey of the night. You should never judge a whiskey by the first pour. Cheers again.
Cheers.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to it. Ron's asking about the peat because that did perk my interest. But I want to talk more about this again. Can you remind me in the group again? You ended with what rye mash bill? You tried various things. What's in here?
So it ended up being about 50% rye, and then about 50% of our base whiskey.
Oh, okay.
Is where it ended.
And you're not saying it's a grain of some kind, obviously a base whiskey for sure. Okay.
Yeah. It's wheat, oats, and malted barley.
Interesting. I would have pegged when you said there's oats in there because that's very interesting to me. It's got a little bit of a. You said the crumble in the nose when you're talking about that apple crumble, and I could say the palate, now that I've had a few sips in, speaks a little bit to that concept of a pastry I often talk about. You're talking about a crumble. For me, I'd say just a little bit of something that's not grainy. Like I'm not out in the grain barn and all the husk going on in the air, but something that gives a bit of breadth or body. And I would have, if you wouldn't have said oats and wheat, I would have pegged it mostly at barley. Okay. And definitely drinks a bit more like an American barely legal rye. Now I'm glad it's rye. I don't know if you and I haven't had this conversation, but there are ryes here in Alberta that are 100% corn, but because they're spicy and legally in Canada, you can call any whiskey a rye. They bear that label rye. And I really respect that you've got at least half the volume in here is rye. You worked hard at that gummy mess.
It was horrible. Like I said, it almost made me quit before I got started. But it got a lot easier when you have a proper still that has a paddle and everything that's mixing it and whatnot. So,
well, I would say as a first release, this is really good, and I would also say it would have a fairly broad appeal. When you've got that balance in some other grains that give it more body, but less spice. I'm not saying there is spice there, but it's not grassy, which sometimes like 100% or a 95.5 rye can really have a lot of dill or menthol or that kind of stuff. And there isn't a lot of that in here. And it can also be very drying on the palate and spicy. And for me, there's some drying qualities. There's some nice spice, but there's a lot of that sweet, your butterscotch note. I just can't get rid of it, but there's floral vanilla. So I think it's going to have broad appeal. Are you getting good feedback from groups?
We're getting amazing feedback from it. And that's kind of why I was not afraid to do 100% rye, and I will release 100% rye. But for the first release, I just wanted it to be easy to drink. I wanted it to be mass appeal. I wanted it to be well received by a lot of people, and a lot of people don't really want that really spicy 100% rye. They want something that's palatable.
Well, and going for that, I think you've hit it. I really feel this is approachable, but has good flavor to chew on. So it's a great first release. Thanks for sharing it with me.
Thank you.
Now I want to cycle back though. I think Ron asked it in here and a few other people, like, you're coming out with when it's ready, and I respect that. Don't release it because it's 3 years and a day. Release it when, okay, this should have our brand. I'm proud of this. So when it comes out, a peated malt, how does that come together? Because I've talked to some groups in BC. They can't do that unless they're a big distillery. If they're a craft distillery, they've got to find peated malt in the province. I've had others, talk about peated cask. That's how they peat it. How are you putting this together?
So this is shortly after we opened up, and this was the second whiskey that we made, was the peated single malt. And I like Scotch, and so I was approached by a craft maltster, and he was wanting to Hammer Malt, Keith with Hammer Malt. Have you ever heard of him or talked to him?
No, but now he's on my radar.
Yeah, so Keith from Hammer Malt, he came out and he was doing something different. He's growing his own grain. He's malting it himself, and he's doing these cool things with smoking and stuff. And I was like, I'd really like to do an Alberta, like a full Alberta grain growing here, Alberta peat moss smoked here, because most distilleries, they'll bring their peated grain in from Scotland or something. So he was willing to try, and we went through a couple batches to kind of fine tune it. So again, it's an experiment, just on a little bit larger of a scale. But I think that how it's aging right now, although it's not super heavily peated, which is good for me. I don't really like a super heavy peated whiskey. So it's nice because the peatiness and the smokiness is there, but it's not overwhelming. And it's different because so he's harvesting the peat moss down by Edmonton. There was a plant that was going in his area. They were going to use the peat moss to produce power or something like that. So he was actually able to harvest some of that, and he used that to smoke and peat the grain for us.
Oh, that's amazing.
So,
I've wanted to hear that story, and now you just told it. I know we have peat here. I grew up in Alberta, and to actually use our peat to smoke our barley, and that's what's going to be coming out of your barrels. That's fantastic. And you mentioned that might be a cask strength. I won't hold you to it, but you kind of hinted that maybe that's coming.
That one might be a cask strength, so that people can play with it. And again, and that's the cask strength is funny too. That's something that I'm also playing with, is like what percent do I put it into the cask at? Because it's so dry here. I actually find that the ABV actually rises in the barrels. Like, obviously, of the Angel shares.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so what I find here is that our whiskeys are coming out at a higher ABV than what we're putting them into, because
and I've heard that because of our climate, and it's always so funny because I might be talking to people out of South or Kentucky, and they're like, no, it gets weaker. The Angels are stealing the alcohol. No, they'll steal whatever evaporates in our climate. That's often water, so it comes out higher than you go in. Yeah.
So I'm actually playing with that now, where I'm actually, so that I don't lose as much, I'm putting it in at a lower ABV. So this one I put in at 63%, and it's hovering just a little bit higher than that right now. So I'm losing water. I'm not losing the good stuff, which is good. But
that's good. I like that. Hey, I've had a comment. Nathan in the chat asked, where can I find this in like the Edmonton area or Calgary area? Obviously, we can visit you in Grand Prairie, I'm sure, and buy it there. But in some of the big centers across Alberta, where can we find it?
And so we do have a website where you can go on and find, see what stores we're in. We're up northern Alberta. A lot of the stores take it through Liquor Connect, so we can also go on Liquor Connect and see who has it.
And I'll give a tip to anybody in Alberta using Liquor Connect. Call them though, because sometimes they got that case months ago and it's cleaned out. So I would say it's a good starting place. But as someone who hunts whiskey, it's worth a call rather than driving around.
And this is it's a fairly new release. It's only been out for a handful of months, so not a lot of stores have taken it on quite yet. So. The best thing to do that helps us is, if you have a local store that you're used to going to, is go in there, ask for us, ask them to bring it in.
That's great advice. Absolutely. promote local, get you guys into more stores, get some demand going. Really appreciate
more
that.
people asking for it, kind of helps us because, then you actually have a demand, right? So
Yep.
right now they haven't heard of it, so it's hard to get the sales sometimes.
Well, I should have, I should have poured your whiskey in this. You guys were really kind to me. You sent me a whiskey and you sent me a glass. A very nice swag there. I actually have had it on the shelf for the last few episodes.
We wanted a kind review, so
yeah. Hey, reviews are all my own, but conversation today is what I'm after. So I really appreciate you agreeing to come on now. And so, we've talked about your journey into this. And just to be clear, you're not still making brandy, are you, under your label?
No, okay. or wine. That's all in the past. I started doing that to kind of feed the wife, but kind of went into my own direction.
Very good. Very good. Okay. And we're talking about this now. It's on the shelves. This is your rye, 43%. Okay. I'm going to ask another one of those questions that you can dodge. But I think there's some misunderstanding around chill filtering and color. Now, let me set you up to decide how you want to respond to this. I had a back and forth with some people I really respect about coloring because I prefer non-color. The reason is I think it adds something to the conversation. It doesn't bother me if it's light straw gold or if it's dark, deep, almost black. Either one of those is fine, and I think it adds to the conversation. But then I've talked to small producers like yourself that said, but the batch variation is so high. We're blending for our flavor profile. And if you put it on the shelf and this bottle looks super light and this bottle looks super dark, that affects people picking it up and wanting to bring it home. And so I can give it away for natural color. And chill filtering, I do like the mouthfeel from non-chill filter. Talk to me about here. I think you'd brag about that on here if you weren't chill filtering and you were doing natural color. So are you doing a bit of coloring and filtering here?
No, we do a particulate filter so you don't get any of the barrel in there. But outside of that, we don't do any chill filtering. I think that for a big brand, a difference on the shelf might mean something to them. But for the small guys, people that are drinking our whiskey, they understand that we're small batch, that we're doing things on small scale, and it is going to vary from batch to batch, from bottle to bottle. It might vary a little bit, but that's the uniqueness of it, and that's what you get with purchasing from a small manufacturer. So we kind of embrace that. We embrace that we may be a little bit off, we may be a little bit different, we may be not exactly the same from one to the other, but everything changes a whiskey. You can have two barrels come from the same factory within the same day that's made from different wood, and that's going to change your output. A large distillery can counter that by having hundreds and thousands of barrels that they can choose from, and they can pick and choose from which barrels how they're going to blend them and whatnot. But we don't have that luxury. We have the luxury of, we've got 6 barrels that we're going to harvest. How they aged and how they are at this harvest is how it's going to hit the bottle.
Yeah, you're getting agreement in the chat, and I do think you spend as much time as we do, and the people that tune into these shows with whiskey, natural and non-chill filter. I get the particulate filter, of course. Yeah. Although I've had bottles, not this one, but that have a little bit of charcoal bits floating around in the bottom of it too, and that's okay. But I appreciate that, and I do respect that. One thing, the reason, I don't know if you saw, I think I did have me on camera. I couldn't tell if it was both of us, to see if you had batched it like, batch 00A or 25 or whatever, because that's something that sometimes will be right on the label. We just know, hey, this is batch whatever, and this other batch, we're going to be a little bit different.
Yeah. And we didn't do that. What we did do was the first 100 bottles off of our line, we numbered them and signed them and everything like that, and put them out into random cases, just so that hopefully somebody would be like, oh, cool, this is something. But we didn't batch each one.
Okay. But that's now something I go hunt. If you put signed bottles in random cases, this sounds like a road trip. This sounds like I got to go knock on some doors.
I can't believe that we didn't send you a low numbered bottle. I'm gonna have to talk to Ali about that.
That's right. This has been great, and again, I do think your rye keeps flavor and is a bit more approachable for a few more drinkers than us rye heads. So I appreciate it. I do. Is there something else you'd like to share with the group here? If anyone here has a last question, I think we've done pretty well tonight.
All right. Outside of look for us and ask for us in your liquor stores. We do. I mean, obviously, whiskey is king, but we do other products. We have rums that are available. We have another unique product that we're doing is a spiced rum, is what we call it. So it's rum made from sugar beet molasses that we bring in from Tabor, Alberta.
Yeah.
So that's a unique product that we do, and we actually have won three awards with that one in our time of being open. So that one's going really well. We do have a traditional rum that we released this year. We have a creme brulee flavored cream liqueur that we're also doing. So we're playing around. We're doing. That's the nice thing about being a small distillery is like I can come in on Monday and be like, hey, I had this idea. Let's try it, and we can go ahead and do it. And so that's what I love about it.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love the idea of using sugar beets from Tabor. Right, that's what you said. I think.
Yeah.
To make a rum we're going to call brum, something like that.
Rum, yeah, because we can't call it rum because it's not made from sugar cane, but so beet rum, it kind of works.
Yeah, beet rum, sure. That's good. And then you could get crazy. I know you got to have a lot of casks to do this, but you could age a rum in one of your casks, and then you could finish a whiskey in one of your rum casks because a lot of whiskey, rum finishes is a thing. To me, they're totally hit and miss. Just me personally. Some of them I love. I do love. I know I go back to these guys a lot, but Sons of Anne did a rum finish on one of their ryes, and it came out beautifully. And I love Belvini Scotch, the Caribbean cask, another beauty. But there's a couple of other Canadians that have been finished in rum that I can't get my head around. It's just tastes like a rum instead of whiskey.
Well, you were talking. I guess another thing to talk about is you were talking about like the brandy casks and finishing in that.
Yeah.
So there's a Haskap. There's a guy. He makes Haskap wine, and he's barrel aging some of that. So we've actually got some of his casks that we're now finishing some whiskey in.
Nice.
Yeah. Nice. So I think that's going to be a nice deep flavor. The Haskaps with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, good to hear. So you are getting some creative stuff going. Some new stuff will be coming. I mean, we're all in this chat looking forward to that locally Alberta peated single malt. That'd be great. But then there'll be more coming. That's really cool. Thanks for joining me, Shawn. Thanks, of course, for sending me a bit of rye to open up and share with you. And I'll make a commitment to you that I'll get this around to people that drop in and I've got a couple other channels too that I'll try to send the ball along to just to get you some more exposure out there.
Well, I do appreciate it. It all helps. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks again. Thanks everyone tuning in. I see a couple just joined now, like Tanner and whatnot. So thanks for coming in, but appreciate all the chat here and wish you the best, Shawn.
Thank you.